BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. In this episode, I will be responding to part 2 of the Citizen Detectives podcast on the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings, responding to your questions and comments about the Zodiac Killer, and talking about the recent shutting down of the Zodiac Killer channel. But just a couple of quick announcements before we begin. The first is that I would invite everybody to go over to the channel Planet X Filmworks, which is hosted by Ross Geraci. I've been a guest on his program. He's been a guest on this show too. And he will be releasing a new video about the Zodiac Killer tomorrow. So there's lots of Zodiac Killer content over on Planet X Filmworks. And I think this is going to be the long-awaited episode on the Domingos Edwards murders from 1963, a possible Zodiac Killer crime. And when I had the opportunity to interview Ross here on Black Box Online Radio, he openly said that out of all of the Zodiac Killer crimes, that the Domingos Edwards murders is the most similar. It's more similar to the Zodiac's MO and behavior than even some of the other Zodiac crimes, say perhaps the Lake Herman Road murders or the Blue Rock Springs shooting, because it's so similar to the Zodiac Killer's Lake Berryessa stabbing. Both of them have killers approaching victims with a gun and a knife and pre-cut lengths of rope, and having the male victim tied up first and then tying up the female victim, or somebody breaks free from the restraints and then starts attacking the killer. That's a little bit different, but the Domingos Edwards murders that occurred in 1963 was more or less what would happen if the Zodiac Killer's Lake Berryessa stabbing went horribly wrong. And Ross is somebody who has truly explored this crime, the Domingos Edwards murders, the murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards, and I think that he might be perhaps the loudest voice on the internet just saying that, hey, we have to look at this crime. This was the Zodiac Killer. So I'm eagerly awaiting everything that Ross is going to be sharing about not only that, but anything Zodiac related over on Planet X Filmworks. And the second one is that to those of you who are following the stories about Jack the Ripper here on Black Box Online Radio, there will not be a Ripper Wednesday that is going to come out this week. On Wednesdays, I normally do a segment about Jack the Ripper, but on this week, I'm going over to Astro Psych 400 here on YouTube, and I will be talking about the book The Sociopath Next Door. That's one that I've mentioned a lot here on Black Box Online Radio, but I'll finally be doing my full book discussion on The Sociopath Next Door. And while a lot of it is true crime related, I just felt that it would fit better with Astro Psych 400 because it's not purely a true crime book, it's more of a psychology book. So if you are curious about how people think and sociopaths and the media's perception of sociopaths, I invite you to go over to Astro Psych 400 and look out for that episode coming later this week on Wednesday. And the final thing that I would like to share is giving a shout out to Robert M., who asked this question on a recent live stream that I did for Black Box Online Radio, just saying, what is your opinion about John Parr Cox as a Zodiac Killer suspect? John Parr Cox is the suspect of Adam Ivester, who runs the channel Real Zodiac Killer Revealed. And some of you might be remembering that I've talked about John Parr Cox on the Zodiac Killer News Reports, sure, and I had 3 episodes about John Parr Cox here on Black Box Online Radio. When I did the interview series last November for Black Box Online Radio, I talked to Adam, and the first one that I did with him was called Zodiac Killer Suspect John Parr Cox. And we did 2 follow-up ones, like Q&A sessions where he could respond to the questions and comments from the people in, well, the comment section from the viewers. And Adam requested that those 3 interviews be taken down. People seem to like having interviews taken down, so it seems. Talking about a popular trend this week. And I was just asking you guys a polling question. Would you like to hear an individual suspect profile video about John Parr Cox as a Zodiac Killer suspect? And the majority of you voted for yes. So the reason why I wanted to create that episode, and it's something that I've thought about doing for a long time, but the reason why I haven't done it yet is I just decided I was going to go with the polling. Whichever way you guys voted, I would put it out there. But I thought, since I no longer have the original interview video, Zodiac Killer Suspect John Parr Cox, why not create a new video just giving commentary on the situation, giving commentary on the subject, talking about somebody else's Zodiac Killer suspect, and trying to weigh the merits of the ideas, which is mostly what I do here on Zodiac Monday. So that will be coming out this week, most likely on Thursday, but I will keep you guys posted, and I'll be sharing some updates here on Black Box Online Radio. So, the Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And some people believe that the Zodiac Killer started operating in 1962 or 63. Other people believe that the Zodiac Killer started committing crimes in 1921, as Steve Hodel explored in his book, The Early Years, talking about his Zodiac Killer suspect, George Hill Hodel, Steve Hodel's father. And other people believe that the Zodiac Killer went on to commit murders well into the 90s, and his things just get more and more intense, even beyond the 90s. How about 2005, when John Cameron says that the Zodiac murdered Teresa Halbach, the victim in Making a Murderer? So the Zodiac Killer has been accused of an enormous amount of crimes, and who was the Zodiac Killer? I mean, it's still a mystery, and some people think that everybody's just wasting their time, and we need to be revisiting the prime suspect, Arthur Lee Allen. And one of them is Vincent McConnell, giving a shout out to him, and he has been releasing a series of Zodiac Killer live streams on Facebook. And Vincent is a longtime follower of this program, and I hope he doesn't mind if I'm just sharing things from his own personal Facebook, but he is releasing them as Zodiac Killer live streams, talking all about not only Arthur Lee Allen, but some facts of the Zodiac Killer mystery. As previously stated, the Zodiac was a serial killer, but a lot of the questions that people have been clouded, and a lot of the information has been distorted. And Vincent brought up a very insightful statement when he just simply said that after the murder of Paul Stine on October 11th of 1969, the Zodiac Killer's final confirmed crime, the famous composite sketch was drawn. And he said it's more of a disservice. It does more harm than good. It's not helpful. The sketch looks like half of the men in America at the time. He even says, if you go back and find an older photo of Tom Voigt, he would look like the Zodiac Killer composite sketch. Caucasian male with glasses, and you would just have to find almost any Caucasian male who had somewhat wide cheekbones and that get a little bit narrow at the jaw line, and then you have the Zodiac Killer's composite sketch. Put a pair of glasses on them, and the glasses really are like a Clark Kent disguise. That wasn't Vincent's comment, that's mine, but it's something that I believe. I think it really throws off a lot of people because they're just using that as they're using an accessory to accentuate certain aspects of other Zodiac Killer suspects while saying thing about what he would look like in a pair of glasses because the Zodiac was last seen wearing a pair of glasses. And I just have to agree with that because the people who contributed to the composite sketch, the individuals who saw the Zodiac Killer, the Robbins kids who were looking out a window and saw the Zodiac, really did not have enough time, in my opinion, to look at him and truly memorize absolutely every single detail of his physical appearance. But some of the other things that Vincent was sharing in his live streams is that the prime suspect in the case is Arthur Lee Allen, and he's just saying that Arthur Lee Allen should have gone out and bought Powerball tickets if he were indeed the Zodiac Killer. And let's look at some of the evidence in favor of Arthur Lee Allen and how, if he were the Zodiac, how he did not get caught. For example, Arthur Lee Allen has a connection to multiple Zodiac Killer crime scenes. Now, this is some source material from Vincent, and it's that after the Blue Rock Springs shooting, on July 4th of 1969, the Zodiac Killer committed the Blue Rock Springs shooting, which saw the death of Darlene Ferrin, and then there was a phone call that was made, and then someone called in saying something to the effect of, if you go 1 mile east on the Columbus Parkway, there are 2 kids that were shot in a brown car with a 9mm Luger. I'm the one who did it. I also killed those 2 kids last year. Goodbye. And he brought up a quote from Thomas Henry Horan, who was interviewed on the Interview with the Experts series. He's also the subject of the book and now documentary, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, and he just states that, Horan's been perhaps the loudest voice. We cannot take that as gospel. There are no audio recordings of the Zodiac Killer's phone call. Nancy Slover, the dispatcher who received that, was simply just trying to recollect what the person had said to her as best as she could. So maybe something else was said, maybe there were different details, that were modified, and more or less that we aren't 100% sure what was said on the phone call, but that payphone is not extremely far from where Arthur Lee Allen was living at the time. And the second Zodiac killer crime that he has a connection to is the Lake Berryessa stabbing. On September 27th of 1969, the Zodiac killer attacked Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard at Lake Berryessa, and again, another phone call is made, and the Zodiac is taking credit for the crime. I'm just going to cut right to the chase. Arthur Lee Allen then shares this story about how he had bloody knives on his car, on the front seat of his car, and said that something to the effect of he was skinning a chicken or whatever it was, or they were for chickens. But the problem with that is he was originally planning to go to Lake Berryessa, but then he said he ended up going to a different place like Salt Point Ranch. The whole point is he seems to have familiarity with that location. He seems to have talked about wanting to go to that location on or around the time of a Zodiac killer crime. So Arthur Lee Allen really does seem like somebody who has a lot of connections to the Zodiac killer case, apart from Robert Graysmith's book. This is just looking at some of the facts that connect him to the story. It doesn't have anything to do with Graysmith at all, or the Zodiac, the ideas shared in the Zodiac Fincher film. This goes well before that, and just Arthur Lee Allen seems like a very shady individual. But the other point that Vincent brought up is in somewhat of a contrast to Thomas Henry Horn, because as I said, Thomas Horn wrote a book called The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, and he talks all about how there was no Zodiac killer. Somebody was writing letters taking credit for crimes that he did not commit. And he has all of his explanations, which I've talked about here at length on Black Box Online Radio. But what Vincent points out is a lot of the evidence really does seem to suggest that there was a single perpetrator and not multiple killers. For example, the Zodiac killer wrote in a letter that he made the call from the Blue Rock Springs payphone, and then he hung up, and then he walked away and he heard the phone ring. I mean, like the way that somebody could call the number back. But after the Lake Berryessa stabbing, the phone was left off the hook. And what Vincent was surmising was that the Zodiac made the phone call from Blue Rock Springs. He hung up the phone, then he's leaving, and he heard the phone ringing, and it startled him for some reason. So what he decided to do after the Lake Berryessa stabbing was leave the phone off the hook so the person couldn't call back. And this was almost like looking at the evidence as suggesting this is one person, someone who is evolving, someone who has some instincts and knowledge that is evolving. And I'm going to share with you what I honestly think in response to Vincent's video. Okay, that doesn't prove anything. I mean, the things that would prove the connections that it is the same person would be matching fingerprints or a matching palm print, a matching fresh palm print on the phone receiver, or maybe if some way, somehow, an eyewitness recognized the person by name at both locations. But I'm going to share what I honestly think as well. Vincent really put out a no-nonsense approach and just saying, yes, this is the same killer. He just learned from his mistake, or he corrected something that bothered him. Yes, I do think that it was the same person who made both of those phone calls. And in the Zodiac hoax theory, it's mostly that those were both prank calls that were made in, or the first one was a prank. Somebody's listening along to the police scanner, and then they hear information, so they made a prank phone call. And then the Zodiac killer persona was created. Sometimes 3 weeks later, when someone was using and abusing the information that had been made available to the general public. But as far as Vincent's take on the subject, I don't think it's 100% proof, but I think that it really does just kind of get to the heart of the issue. Yes, this is what the same person would do. This is what a single killer would do. Something bothered him, so he changed the way he was behaving to almost do it in a self-soothing way. Now, there's a person out there who does look at the Zodiac hoax theory in a different way, and his name is Eddie McNamara. Eddie McNamara has been a guest on this program. I have 2 interviews with him, and he does talk about things that are somewhat in line with the Zodiac hoax. I don't think he uses those exact terms to talk about his observations. More or less, I think a fair assessment of Eddie McNamara's claim is that the Zodiac killer's Lake Herman Road murders were not committed by the Zodiac Killer. And I really haven't talked to you guys much about the Lake Herman Road murders in this episode so far. The first confirmed crime committed by the Zodiac Killer was on December 20th of 1968, the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. Thomas Horn, the author of The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, proposes that they were killed by some type of gang that had connections to the Hells Angels, and it was a dispute over drug dealing. David Faraday, the male victim at Lake Herman Road, could have possibly ratted somebody out, and that person was going to rat on people who had the connections to the Hells Angels, so they just decided to off David Faraday as a way to silence everything. But Eddie McNamara looks at it in somewhat of a different way, in a very different way, actually. He has suspects in his observations on the Lake Herman Road murders, and he also just believes that they were killed by a group of people who were completely unconnected to the Zodiac Killer mystery. And I talk a lot about that with Eddie McNamara in the 2 interviews that I have shared with him, and I invite you to check those out here on Black Box Online Radio. You can also hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with all of these Zodiac Killer observations. But I want to read an update from Eddie, who sent something to me recently for Zodiac Monday, and it says, Thomas Horn has a very good eye when it comes to noticing that something was off with the official Zodiac story. I think his background as a writer and professor allowed him to notice inconsistencies in voice and plagiarism in the Zodiac letters. I'm not sold on his suspects either. I think that he was sharp for identifying the problem, but I don't think he provided a solution. And in 1970, Les Lundblad, the investigator at Lake Herman Road, was presented with a confession from a party claiming to be present at the Lake Herman Road murders and statements from multiple informants identifying the same people involved, and he rejected the findings. One of the other members of law enforcement, was so outraged about it, he told the story to a newspaper reporter, and his doubts about Lake Herman Road being the Zodiac Killer made the paper. And Eddie is approaching this as a work in progress, and I don't want to share all of his findings, but he has more or less just stated that he wants to really try and find out if he can prove if the Zodiac Killer's Lake Herman Road murders were not committed by the same killer. But I will come back to Arthur Lee Allen in just a second, but I wanted to share something with you guys from the most recent live stream that I did talking about the Zodiac, and that was that I had been reading the book Killing for Sport by Pat Brown. You've seen the title and the picture go by here on Zodiac Monday, and I've talked to you about it a little bit, but if you didn't hear that live stream, I just want to share one thing from that book right now in terms of psychological profiling about why people think that this could be the same killer. Like the Lake Herman Road murders, the Blue Rock Spring shooting, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and the Stein murder could all be the same killer. Pat Brown doesn't use the Zodiac as a case example, but what she says is, serial killers tend to start out by committing the first murder in an unplanned way, meaning that they didn't necessarily commit the first crime because of a calculated reason. It was a moment of rage, somebody just snapped, they were thinking that they weren't immediately going to get punished, they didn't care if they would get punished, they were just driven to do this because of some unknown reason. Some type of force in them pushed them to commit murder. Then they committed the first crime, and they got away with it. So the next one was a test. They're thinking, okay, I've committed one murder and I got away with it. Now I'm going to try a second crime. And if you look very clearly at the Zodiac's Lake Herman Road murders and the Blue Rock Spring shooting, well, that's a very, very similar thing. That could be a very reasonable explanation. The same person wanted to try to commit a similar crime, like the Lake Herman Road murders and the Blue Rock Springs shooting are just mostly sneaking up on people parked in cars in secluded areas, firing some gunshots and running away. That's what this person is thinking. Okay, now I'm going to do this again, because I did it once and I got away with it. Let's see if I could do it twice and get away with it. Oh, I did. But this person is constantly trying to up his game. He wants to fuel his excitement. So for 6 or 7 months, he's been thinking, now I'm going to commit this crime and I'm going to make a phone call and I'm going to brag about it. And when he gets away with that successfully, he starts writing letters and the cryptograms showing off that he has committed these murders and gotten away with it. Next, he wants to do something even more intense. He knows that he can fire gunshots at people in secluded areas and run away, so he wants to commit the Lake Berryessa stabbing for whatever reason. Something, I think it all ties back to fueling his own excitement, doing something that was more thrilling to him. So he's wearing a gun, he's wearing a costume, carrying a gun, a knife, pre-cut lengths of rope, makes up a silly story about escaping from prison in Montana, trying to get to Mexico, attacking the victims at Lake Berryessa, making another phone call. Then, after Lake Berryessa, he wants to commit a crime in a populated area because he knows that he can commit Lover's Lane style murders. Other people think that, well, two of the victims that survived were male, Mike Michaud and Brian Hartnell. Therefore, he wants to also really prove that he can kill a man, so he wants to target a taxi driver, but committing it in the area of Presidio Heights, a more populated area, is not what people are going to expect him to do. And this is even getting beyond Pat Brown. This is more talking about the stuff that I often cite from Anthony LaPala. The first three murders are committed in a similar way, and then the fourth one is a pure deviation from the pattern because everybody thinks that he's going to do something like target couples parked in cars. No, he's going to murder a lone male. And if we even tie in another statement from Richard Walter, the psychological profiler, the Zodiac murdered Paul Stine and walked past two police officers and still got away with it. He's already proven that he can commit murders and not get caught. Well, that means that he is not really going to fuel his excitement anymore by committing the murders, so he's devoting all of his energy to writing the letters and the ciphers. More ciphers came after the murder of Paul Stine, of course. I mean, multiple ciphers came after the murder of Paul Stine. And that's ultimately the take on the subject. And I'm blending in Pat Brown's analysis with some other psychological profilers. And on the live stream called The Creation of a Serial Killer, I was talking about the book of just that name, I, The Creation of a Serial Killer. And it's about Keith Jesperson, the happy-faced killer. And there's even some things about how the first crime can be committed in an unplanned way. And Keith Jesperson is even saying, I said that I would never hit a woman. I said that I would never raise my hand to a woman, but I was just so red with rage that I killed her. Like, he said that he saw red because of anger, not that he was red with rage. He didn't use those exact terms, but that's what he was thinking. He was so angry that he saw red and he ended up murdering women. He's just completely surprised about that with his first crime. So, I mean, those are some things that I would like people to consider. Now, we've heard a little bit about Arthur Lee Allen, the prime suspect in the Zodiac killer case, having some close proximity to the crime scenes. And we've also heard a little bit about the Zodiac hoax, about how these might be unrelated crimes. Is there one particular way that you would be leaning? I'm asking you in the comment section. And I think that I would like to try and just look at somebody else's statement here about Arthur Lee Allen. And somebody contacted me named D.H. Elweg, and this was sent in to the email address, BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. Anybody can write the show there. And this might be pushing your favor in one way, or maybe it'll make you think differently. And I'm just going to say this as a direct quotation. I think the reason people constantly come up with Zodiac suspects is because otherwise there would be nothing new to say. Arthur Lee Allen isn't a fad suspect. The evidence doesn't change year to year. He became a suspect for the same reason a lot of people become suspects and are even caught. Someone talks to the police that knows him. It's unfortunate that Allen's health was just so bad, or else he would have stood before a jury and Cheney would have been forced to testify in court. The bombs found under his house in the 1970s would have been damning. Allen was behaving like a guilty person, and the jury would have seen that. There's no suspect besides Allen that could have been convicted. It's hard to imagine that Allen wasn't the Zodiac. The writing samples from his right hand show deception because he could actually write with it. He claimed that the bombs that matched the Zodiac letters were put under his parents' house by someone he barely knew and couldn't identify 10 years earlier. That's a lie. Then Spinelli goes on the stand and says Allen told him he's Zodiac, and the story unfolds under cross-examination and is convincing. The Zodiac killings were so antiseptic, there was little evidence left. So we don't get fingerprints or DNA, but we do have one of the victims identifying Allen from a lineup 2 decades later. That would be Mike Michaud, of course. The Lake Berryessa witness who saw a similar-looking person. In Allen's case, would have been circumstantial but cumulative. If you think that's a fad, I don't know what to say. The question in my mind is, did Allen also kill co-eds in Santa Rosa and dump them in hills in a complete circle surrounding the town? And the email does go on for a while. And firstly, I would like to thank DHLWig for sending this to BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. And Arthur Lee Allen is not only the prime suspect in the Zodiac killer mystery, he's also a suspect in the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings, which I'll be discussing later in the episode. And, to respond to some of this, I particularly like how DHLWig said that the Zodiac killer mystery is antiseptic. The exact line is, the Zodiac killings were so antiseptic that very little evidence was left. And this is a point where I have to agree. Antiseptic, I like that good word. And even if the Zodiac didn't leave an enormous amount of evidence behind, the investigators helped him by more or less contaminating the evidence, destroying the evidence. And you guys know this all. I've talked to you about this so much, but there is a line from the Zodiac killer when he said that he didn't leave any fingerprints behind because he was putting airplane cement on his fingertips, which is more or less the glue for model airplanes. Not for real airplanes, but airplane cement for model airplanes. And Vincent McConnell was also discussing this on his live streams when he said that he believes that story. And at first, I really didn't know what to make of it. Was the Zodiac just thinking, oh crap, did I leave fingerprints behind? Well, I better say some BS in the letter so that they don't know what to look for and now they won't know what to think. And I do think that the Zodiac was a sociopath, and he was a master of this type of sociopathic tendency where just leaving statements that will keep people constantly guessing will go on until the end of time. But I believe the Zodiac as well. I think the Zodiac genuinely put the model glue on his fingertips because the Zodiac really didn't leave a lot of evidence behind. He didn't leave a lot of fingerprints. There could be partial fingerprints, but I don't think that the Zodiac left an enormous amount of fingerprints behind. And the Zodiac does seem like someone who is putting in a lot of thought and effort into covering his tracks. And he was also aided by law enforcement messing up every step of the way. You even had two police officers going past him. That whole thing about how the wrong race of the person to be on the lookout for was given. They said they need to be on the lookout for a black man, and then the Zodiac walks right past them, so they just let him keep going. More or less. There are some other connecting factors to that story. But I believe the thing about the model airplane cement. I also don't think that Arthur Lee Allen was a fad suspect, and Drew Beeson talks about this a lot on his live streams, when he just says that Arthur Lee Allen was the prime suspect in the Zodiac killer mystery, and he has never truly been exonerated, to everybody's satisfaction. He never seems to go away, and this is because Drew Beeson seems to think that Arthur Lee Allen had some involvement to a certain degree, but of course Drew Beeson's suspect is Donald Lee Cheney. However, I see where people are coming from when they're trying to share all this stuff about Arthur Lee Allen, partnered with the statements that were made by Vincent that Arthur Lee Allen has connections to multiple Zodiac killer crime scenes or locations in Zodiac activity. And I didn't remember the exact date that Arthur Lee Allen was caught with bombs in his house, or the bombs in the Allen house, I'll just say that. But that definitely did happen at some point. And yes, there are incriminating things that would tie Arthur Lee Allen. And if he was running his mouth about being the Zodiac killer to people, even if it were untrue, it probably would have come up in trial. And one point, though, to DHLWig that I will strongly, strongly disagree with is, Allen is the only suspect that could be convicted in court? No, absolutely not. You could build circumstantial cases for any suspect, firstly. Secondarily, what if they are able to find the Zodiac killer's DNA from something? What if they are able to put partial fingerprints together, or they actually do have some type of evidence that they're sitting on that we don't know about? What if they actually are able, by they, what if independent investigators are actually able to put together an investigation and a portfolio of evidence that is convincing enough to get somebody else convicted? I do think that other Zodiac killer suspects could have been convicted for these crimes. But what do you think? Please put your ideas in the comments section down below. And right now, I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts on BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxOnlineRadio allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. You can also use the super thanks here on YouTube. And the first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And Batman66 has also been helping out a lot with the YouTube shorts and reels. I release them as shorts here on YouTube and reels on Instagram and Facebook. And the shorts mostly focus on the stories of serial killers, but I do respond to true crime news from time to time. And I mean, I'm talking about stories from all over the world, Asia, Africa, as well as in the United States of America. And the most recent one that I did was talking about the pig farm killer from British Columbia and Canada. And that was a rather breaking news story about that case. I invite you to check out the shorts on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And you can also find me on Facebook at Ned DeHaan, Instagram, BlackBoxNid88. That's the same name as the BuyMeACoffee.com page. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88. And the next one is from River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery is another regular and consistent supporter, but last week he asked a challenge question. Will you give a suspect rating to Suspect Watterson, whom you were discussing on last week's Zodiac Monday? Suspect Watterson is a moniker or alias or pseudonym that has been given to a Zodiac killer suspect whom we do not know that much about. And my honest answer is, and I'll just cut to the chase, I will answer the question. But my honest answer is I give him a question mark out of 10 because I really don't know that much about him. I mean, I don't even know completely what he looks like. I don't even know his full name. I have seen a partial photograph of him. I shared some basic background info about him. He was a commercial pilot. He had connections to multiple locations in the Zodiac crime scene timeline, meaning that when the Zodiac killer is writing the letter, 1971, talking about the LA Times, suspect Watterson was in Los Angeles, and during 1968-69, he's a pilot coming in and out of the Bay Area. The pilot job could explain the frequency in Zodiac activities. He matches some of the facial descriptions from what I can see, but I mean, I don't know what he looks like without his pilot hat on. I don't know what his hair looked like in 1969. I don't know what his shoe size was. I mean, but he definitely has some very striking similarities to the composite sketch, no matter how accurate it is, he does resemble the composite sketch. Just trying to state that as a fact, particularly the lines on his cheekbones his jawline is almost identical to the composite sketch. So my immediate response was, if everything about him is true, perhaps I would give him a 6 out of 10, but I don't even know if this stuff is true. I mean, if I don't know his real name, how can I even, go through the files and verify everything that people are saying? The honest answer is question mark out of 10, 6 out of 10, but that's a little bit of wishful thinking because a lot of the things about Suspect Watterson might not even be completely accurate because people do mess around with the facts from time to time. And I'm not accusing anybody who has shared his stuff online of doing this, but sometimes it's almost like a game of telephone or whispers where the information slowly gets changed and morphed and molded in a different way, and people do this unintentionally. So I think that a 6 is a generous thing, but part of me just kind of wants the Zodiac Killer mystery to be solved, so I will lean that way. But thank you, River Prawn Pottery, for that excellent question. And the next supporter on BuyMeACoffee.com is DNA King. DNA King, thank you so much. And DNA King has been following everything very closely, much appreciated. And lastly, we have Stuart McAdam over on BuyMeACoffee.com. Thank you, Stuart, as well. Stuart has also been a previous guest on this program talking about the Zodiac Killer and D.B. Cooper. Every Friday I do a segment about D.B. Cooper here on Black Box Online Radio called Cooper Friday. And I would like to conclude this episode by talking about the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings. I follow the Citizen Detective podcast, which is hosted by Mike Morford, Lee Meller, and Alex Ralph. They also have regular panelists who are guests, but they are more or less contributors. I think you would call them contributing panelists. Cloyd Steiger, a former homicide detective who's the author of Homicide: The View from Inside the Yellow Tape. and Seattle's Forgotten Serial Killer, talking about Gary Jean Grant, and an individual named Susanna Ryan, who is a forensics expert. Lee Miller is a criminologist. Alex Ralph is a lawyer, and Mike Morford is a very close true crime follower. He is True Crime Guy over on Twitter, and he is one of the real Zodiac Killer experts out there. He was included in the Zodiac Killer Interview with the Experts series. So they're talking about the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings. And part one of their show was all about just suspect profiling. And if you didn't hear my first episode, I'll give you just a small piece from Dr. Lee Miller, and I love his insights on things because what he said was that the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings are something that gets tied to the Zodiac Killer mystery very closely. Robert Graysmith even talked about this in Zodiac Unmasked, about how he thought that Arthur Lee Allen was the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer. Other Zodiac Killer suspects have been called out, and there's one that I didn't mention in the most recent episode, and his name is Jim Mordecai. I mean, is it fair to say that Jim Mordecai is an alternative Zodiac Killer suspect? He's the subject of the HBO Max documentary, The Truth About Jim, and he gets accused of both sets of homicides. And the point is that the Zodiac Killer gets accused of the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, which took place in the early 1970s. Multiple women were attacked, sexually assaulted, they were bound and hog-tied, and Dr. Lee Miller was postulating that this was done as not only a sex act, but somebody experienced sexual arousal from tying up the victims. In multiple crime scenes, they have semen DNA, most famous being the murder of Kim Wendy Allen, and there are other suspects out there in the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings that go beyond the Zodiac Killer. Ted Bundy is a suspect in them, and it seems a little bit more similar to his crimes than the Zodiac crimes, because the Zodiac didn't leave semen DNA behind. Ted Bundy was definitely a sexually motivated serial killer. And also, there is an individual named Fred Benally who got into a traffic accident, and in his van that he was driving, he had drawings of what appeared to be women in these bondage-like situations. One of them, there is a picture of one of the victims, Kim Wendy Allen, and I'm really trying not to misstate something, so I'm just going to kind of move on from that. And when I appeared on the Professor Dad channel once as a panelist myself, I was on there with Drew Beeson. He openly said that Fred Manali should be an excellent suspect for the murder of Kim Wendy Allen. Maybe not the entirety of the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings, but the murder of Kim Wendy Allen. And that was more or less exactly what Dr. Lee Miller said, that he should be a suspect for the murder of Kim Wendy Allen. Now, was the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer the Zodiac Killer? This is almost a direct quotation from the Citizen Detective show by Dr. Lee Miller when he said, Arthur Lee Allen is the worst suspect for the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings. The worst suspect. So all this stuff in Zodiac Unmasked about Graysmith tying him to the crimes, the worst suspect for the following reasons. Number one, Arthur Lee Allen was a pedophile who appeared to prefer younger individuals than that of the Santa Rosa hitchhiker victims. I mean, he did go after teenage boys and also little boys, little girls. And he didn't seem to have strong relationships with women in his life, and Lee Miller's all about this. Number one, he believes that the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer was someone who wanted to be around age-appropriate women, maybe, I don't recall his exact words stated, but perhaps a heterosexual male who wants to be around age-appropriate women. And Arthur Lee Allen was very clearly a homosexual, most likely, I think, let's just say it, he was a bisexual, but preferred men, but younger boys, because he was a real-life sex offender. Number two, Arthur Lee Allen does not seem to have an enormous amount of evidence that he had this type of bondage fetish for women. I mean, that's what it comes back to, that Lee Miller's all about the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer did not only want to tie women up to secure them or make them incapable of running away, he experienced sexual arousal from doing this. Now, somebody like Ted Bundy, sure, maybe some way, somehow, you could say that that's very similar. But with Arthur Lee Allen, he was just completely different in terms of his sexuality. And I'll share something from the first segment, if you didn't hear that, about the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings. Lee Miller also began to hypothesize that the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings were done by two people, not one, because of the way that the victims were disposed, the lengths that the killer would have to walk to dispose of their bodies. It almost seemed as if there were two people walking and carrying the body and disposing them. A serial killer duo was responsible. That also goes against absolutely everything Zodiac related. And I'm going to be very frank with you. I've never believed that the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker Slayer and the Zodiac Killer were the same person. But there is that documentary out there that talks about Jim Mordecai as not only a Zodiac suspect, but also a Santa Rosa Hitchhiker Slayer suspect. And I think almost everybody agreed upon this at the end of hearing the suspect profile for Jim Mordecai. Was he the Zodiac Killer? Almost certainly not. Was he the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker Slayer? Maybe, perhaps, possibly. He should be viewed as a suspect in the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker slayings more than the Zodiac Killer mystery. An interesting thing about Jim Mordecai is that he was a star football player. Then he began to develop these bizarre types of infatuations with, I guess you'd say teenage girls, but in their early teen years, 13, 14, 15, early to mid teen years. And then, of course, he definitely had relationships with older women, but he had the bondage fetish, and that seemed to I shouldn't have said that. He seemed to match up with some things with the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker Slayer, but they do have a lot of physical evidence that has been left behind. And as previously stated, the Zodiac Killer's murders were antiseptic. I said I love that quotation. The Santa Rosa Hitchhiker slaying were not. All types of physical evidence was left behind, including semen DNA. Almost certainly not as well that there's a Zodiac connection. But there is another suspect that is discussed on a website called hitchhikerkiller.com, and it's one that I had never heard before. And they began sharing this on the Citizen Detective podcast, and there is a suspect in the hitchhiker murders named Jack Bokin, Bokin, hitchhikerkiller.com. And it says, who was hunting young girls and co-eds in Sonoma County in the 1970s? The hitchhiker killings began in 1972 with the disappearance of 12-year-old Maureen Sterling and 13-year-old Yvonne Weber, who disappeared from an ice rink around 9 p.m. on February 4th of 1972. Both girls, like other young people in that era, often hitchhiked. Their new bodies were found down a steep embankment shortly after Christmas in December. A dozen other young women, including Santa Rosa College co-eds Kim Wendy Allen and Jeanette Haley, vanished hitchhiking the same area. For over 40 years, their homicides and disappearances have never been solved. No suspect has ever been charged or identified in the series of unsolved murders of young women and that continued through the 1990s. Is the San Francisco serial rapist Jack Bokin the hitchhiker killer? See, that's another point, though, that has always steered me away from connecting the Zodiac to the hitchhiker murders. I think you should be looking for a serial rapist, not a serial killer like the Zodiac, but a serial rapist indeed. And I'm going to continue onward here. We're going to be talking about a victim who actually got away. A survey engineer setting up stakes in the sweltering 80-degree California sun spotted a female body dumped like a limp rag doll in the brush alongside a barbed wire fence a dozen feet off a rural road. I mean, even a dozen feet. You see other stories about people who are moving and disposing of bodies when there's a single killer. They don't always travel that far. It's physically possible for a man to carry a woman's body even up to 100 meters, the way that one of the hitchhiker victims was dumped. But I do see the point about how this could be two people working in tandem, or two people working together rather than a single killer. And a sheriff's deputy found the body 12 feet off the road, and it was 32-year-old Michelle Veal, lying face up with blood and lacerations visible on her head. In the final act of humiliation, her killer not only inflicted bodily harm, but stripped the clothes from the single mother's body. It was July 1996, which was also Veal's youngest child's 7th birthday. The Santa Rosa medical examiner determined that Michelle was forcefully fighting her attacker. She suffered injuries in the process, including a broken neck. The devoted mother and former interior designer had likely been killed 2 days earlier, which explains why she failed to show up for her daughter's birthday party in Union City. My mom always celebrated our birthdays. She never missed a single birthday, one recalls. Now, Veal's brutal death and the unceremonious dumping of her lifeless body shocked the affluent community of Santa Rosa. It recalled a haunting and string of murders known as the Hitchhiker Killings. Now, Michelle Veal was murdered in 1996, and the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings took place in the early 1970s. So it's going to be difficult to connect even that crime, but they just want to share this as a possible crime that could be connected to the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, hitchhikerkiller.com. I mean, 20 years is not an impossible reign of terror for a serial killer, but I think that this is one where that might even be a little bit unlikely. But the point is that this website is going to tie everything back to an individual named Jack Boken, who was a serial rapist. And when I heard this stuff about him on the Citizen Detective podcast, this not only was he attacking women, but also breaking their bones and necks and just very, very vicious assaults. And I mean, you heard the stuff about their lacerating their bodies. Not only is he trying to murder them, torturing them to death, a psychopathic torturer murderer, perhaps. And it was even one of those things when I just had to question. I know I want to explore true crime to get a greater understanding of humanity, but this is pushing the limits. And I am just sharing some things with you guys about how there are other suspects in the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings outside of the Zodiac killer, outside of Arthur Lee Allen, outside of Dennis Land, Thomas Horn suspect, who is also a Zodiac killer suspect. Outside of Jim Mordecai, there's Ted Bundy, Fred Manali, Jack Boken, and a host of others. It's an unsolved set of homicides. But what do you think about the Santa Rosa case? And please feel free to put anything you want in the comment section down below. And the final concluding thing for this Zodiac Monday is I'm going to be talking to you guys about the Zodiac Killer channel, which has recently been shut down. Now, I don't know a whole lot about this. In fact, I don't know a lot more than you guys. But a video came out about 6 days ago saying that the Zodiac Killer channel, which had numerous suspect profile videos, letter analysis videos, as well as the three-part docu-series Obsession into Darkness and the Interview with the Expert series, that channel was going to shut down and delete permanently. And this was a decision that was not made by me. I never had any ownership of the Zodiac Killer channel, and I never did anything other than the narrations. I was not involved in any of the decision-making for that channel or the associated programs. It was started by two guys from Scotland who wanted to find someone with an American accent to do the narrations for the videos, and they asked me, and I said yes. I normally say yes to things like that, and I had a good experience working with the Zodiac Killer channel. There were some big opportunities at the time. The first thing that they asked me to do was a documentary series called Obsession into Darkness, and we made 3 Zodiac Killer documentaries, user-generated, of course, but they were still some content that was well-received. There were pieces of content that were well-received here on YouTube from people who were close followers of the Zodiac Killer mystery. And in 2021, we launched the Interview with the Expert series, talking to people all across the Zodiac Killer spectrum of theories and ideas. And a lot of you guys were asking about those specifically. Some asked about Obsession into Darkness, but mostly I received some comments from people saying, "Hey Ned, can you ask the guy behind the Zodiac Killer channel, does he have anything that he would like to share with you? Will he send you the Interview with the Experts files, and can you upload them on BlackBoxOnlineRadio?" And my short response is, I've reached out, I've asked those questions, I have not heard anything back. And Steve, the owner of the Zodiac Killer channel, apparently was dealing with some issues involving online harassment, as well as some overall frustrations with internet communities in general, and that's why he chose to delete the channels. He put out about a 3-minute video saying that he was going to permanently delete all content from the Zodiac Killer channel, and I really don't know if they still have anything archived. I know that archived files of the Interview with the Expert series were made in 2021, but that's been 3 years. I'm not sure if that stuff still exists. And, it really is a shame that all of that content has been deleted, because I remember having conversations back in 2021, and they were saying, even if the Zodiac Killer mystery is solved, those interviews, like the interview with the expert series, that's going to be online forever, even after we're gone. For 25 years, people are going to be listening to those things because it was something that was a little bit, it was a little bit unique in the sense and way that it was organized, only because the Zodiac Killer channel doesn't put out content extremely frequently. So that was something that was very well received and appreciated by people who follow the Zodiac Killer mystery. A lot of people like the sound and the designs and the footage of San Francisco that was included, the moving pictures partnered with the narrations and the discussions. And absolutely, I had a good time working on that and talking to people because, I love to ask challenge questions and I love to get their responses. And I wish I had more to say. I wish I could just tell you, oh yeah, he said this in response to uploading content onto my channel. I have not heard anything back yet. But sometimes people do want to retreat into private life and they don't want to deal with any type of public presence or persona, but that more or less is the situation as it is. And hopefully there will be more interviews here on Black Box Online Radio in the future, although they'll be done in somewhat of a different way than the interview with the expert series. And of course, more book discussions. Maybe I can get in touch with some filmmakers and we can do another 3-part documentary series. We were supposed to do more segments to that. I mean, both the interview with the expert series and Obsession into Darkness had additional episodes that were planned. And I'm always saying, yes, I'm down for it. I'm ready for it. I would love to do more. But, people have things going on offline, outside of the internet world, outside of cyberspace. So I understand that too. And it sucks, but, that's life. And I mean, I completely get it, even though I am a little bit disappointed that all of that content is gone. But that'll be all for me now. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there is always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram. And I will see you over there. Goodbye.